Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today we are doing the next installment of my Project Pynchon series, in which I read through all of Thomas Pynchon's works in chronological order. And the next stop on this project is Vineland. Vineland, published in 1990, has the unwanted distinction of being Thomas Pynchon's follow-up to Gravity's Rainbow, which many literary critics consider to be one of the greatest novels of all time, definitely one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. This book is not nearly as long as Gravity's Rainbow. It is significantly more traditional than Gravity's Rainbow, especially even for Pynchon. But roughly speaking, the plot follows Prairie, who is the daughter of Zoid Wheeler, who is an ex-hippie and counterculturalist. They are currently living in California, sort of laying low. Zoid basically his only source of income is like a mental disability check that he gets once a year, so he has to do something crazy every year. And as the novel begins, he's attempting to jump out of a glass window, not doing it because he's insane, but because he needs the money. And the novel follows several characters, interweaving between different time periods, but mainly follows a group of hippies and counterculturalists as they endure Nixonian pressure from the 1960s and 1980s. And as we find Zoid and Prairie at this point, old demons are resurrecting. An FBI agent who was responsible for dismantling a former commune that Zoid was a part of has resurfaced, and he's looking for Zoid. So Zoid and Prairie go underground. Zoid splits off and leaves Prairie with former friends of his from his hippie days. Throughout the course of the novel, Prairie learns about her father, the counterculturalist cult he was a part of, as well as her mother, Zoid's former lover, who is sort of infamous among the group because she was at one point this like fiery and passionate leader of this militant film organization hell-bent on like showing the atrocities of police brutality on the rise with President Nixon's power. However, she ended up turning on this group because she was in love with Brock Vaughn, the FBI agent. The FBI prosecutor. And so throughout the course of the novel, Prairie hears excerpts from different members of the former commune. She looks at films made by her mother and sort of tries to piece together who her mother was. And as well as the reader tries to piece together the relationship Frenesi had with Brock Vaughn, had with Zoid, and had with the community. And as well as what this community exactly was, called PR3. So really, how do I feel about Vineland? I've read V, I've read The Crying of Lot 49, and I've read Gravity's Rainbow at this point, so even though I don't claim to be an expert on Thomas Pynchon, I think I have a couple rounds under my belt and can somewhat talk in a sophisticated fashion about Thomas Pynchon and about Vineland, mainly with my own opinions on the book. I've had a very complicated relationship with Thomas Pynchon throughout the series so far. If you watch my V video, which I recommend watching because I think it's pretty good, and I really appreciate all the comments on that video because I wasn't a big fan of V, and the Pynchon diehards comments are very supportive and understanding. However, I read Crying of Lot 49 soon after, a little skeptical as to whether or not I would like it, and it turns out I absolutely adored the book. I read it 5 months ago at this point, and that ending just has not left, like that impact of the ending has not lost impact for me. And then, of course, at the beginning of the year, the only one of two videos I have out this year is Gravity's Rainbow. And, it's Gravity's Rainbow. It's a struggle to read at times, but my God, was it an incredibly rewarding experience. And The Crying of Lot 49 was in my top 3 books I read of last year. Gravity's Rainbow is almost guaranteed to be one of the top 30 books I read this year. And so, even though I started off bad with Pynchon, as time has gone on, I have grown to really, really enjoy his works. And so how do I feel about V? V is a more traditional novel, as I started off this video with. Again, when I say traditional, you have to include the fact that it's written by Thomas Pynchon, so don't expect a James Patterson novel, because this is not it. Vineland, for me, represents the best of Pynchon's habits as well as the worst of Pynchon's habits. Starting off with the positives, by God, this book has some of the best character work I have ever, not ever, but at least with my Pynchon reading, some of the best character work. The Frenzy arc, especially with her relationship with Brock Vaughn as she slowly disassociates with the commune in California, PR3, was very engaging for me. I was on Reddit because I was just curious as to other people's thoughts in this book because it is one of Pynchon's more divisive novels. What people thought about that. Some people were upset that the leading reason why Frenzy, attaches herself to Brock Vaughn and disassociates herself with her commune is because she just really loves having sex with Brock. And some people complained about that being like oversimplification, but I found it to be pretty interesting personally. I thought it was like it's not like it's not like she finds value in his ideals, which would be kind of lame. It's like purely like the animalistic or like emotional attachment to him that I thought was interesting, and how Brock Vaughn exploits that is tragic, but also creates one of the more despicable characters in a Thomas Pynchon novel. And also Prairie's connection with her mother and how she forms a bond through her via the films that she made was very great. A huge part of the novel is making attachments of people through other media. For example, Zoid still finds attachment through Frenzy through his memories, and even in the novel, he has like this fantasy of her coming off from the beach in her bikini and coming home, and he has like an idealized version of it, but even he realizes like, oh, in this memory, in reality, this is when she left him. So that was pretty sad, but also has a lot to say about the two different characters. And also with Prairie, as she doesn't really know her mother that well, still having to have that attachment through the films, I thought was really touching in a way. Especially if you've looked at photos of old family members who you never got to meet or, didn't meet, or if they passed away when you were really young. You had the photos and you create ideas of who the people were. And I think that's captured really well in Vineland here. I want to read a small portion of a scene where Prairie is looking at documentary footage recorded by Frenzy of police brutality in California in the 1960s. At some point, Prairie understood that the person behind the camera most of the time really was her mother, and that if she kept her mind empty, she could absorb, conditionally become Frenzy, share her eyes, feel when the frame shook with fatigue or feet or nausea. Frenzy's whole body there as much as her mind, choosing the frame, her will to go out there, load the roll, get the shot. Prairie floated, ghostly light of head, as if Frenzy were dead, but in a special way, a minimum security arrangement, where limited visits mediated by projector and screen were possible, as if somehow next reel or the other on after, the girl would find a way, some way to speak to her. This is probably the most riveting part of the novel for me, which would also lead me into my first complaint of the novel, and that is I don't think this book has the right main character. The character of Weed, who is this professor at this college who, incidentally becomes the leader of this PR3 commune in response and in revolt to the Nixonian oppression. He is dealing with the paranoia of potentially being betrayed, dealing with the paranoia of not understanding why he's put in this position. He's very much like a Slothrop or an Oedipus Mass type character where some of that paranoia is imagined, some of it is extremely real, because Frenzy is the one causing the paranoia, Frenzy and Brock. So it's interesting in one way that he takes the paranoia theme and explores it from a different perspective, but at the same time, the Weed character and his tragic downfall, because he's eventually killed due to Frenzy's conspiracy, created a really riveting character for me that I don't think was explored well enough. He's also like kind of like a Christ-like figure too, because he gets resurrected at one point. There's a whole zombie plot that is interesting in theory, but I don't think is executed in a particularly meaningful way. But I want to read that section too, because I did find it interesting, because at first Weed starts off as this very idealized person, but as time goes on, he has to deal with the real world politics of being a separate community against the U.S. government that has them completely overpowered, and trying to maintain that pacifist mentality. Just like Slothrop and just like Oedipus Mass, the ideals remain with them, but they become more cynical. Once he would have proclaimed, because in this country nobody in power gives a shit about any human life but their own, This forces us to be humane, to attack what matters more than life to the regime and those it serves, their money and their property. But these days, he was saying, it's wrong because if you pick up a rifle, the man picks up a machine gun. By the time you find some machine gun, he's all set up to shoot rockets. Begin to see a pattern? Between these two replies, something had happened to him. He was still preaching humane revolution, but seemed darkly exhausted, unhopeful, snapping at everybody, then apologizing. If anybody caught this change, it was much too late to make a difference. They still came trooping up the alley to Rex's place in Las Nalgas, like ducklings looking for a mother. Surf, somewhere hidden in the fog, didn't crash so much as collapse on itself, wetly over and over. Though we lived there, Rex didn't show up much at these gatherings anymore, having finalized his own plans to fly off to Paris and join whatever was left of the Vietnamese section of the 4th International. It'll never work, we told him. You're an Anglo. Who'll trust you? I really think the novel would have been perfect if it followed Weed and it ended with his death, because, my God, this is, out of the 4 novels that I've read from Pynchon so far, this is the worst ending. My biggest complaint with V is that I felt like it was a fairly shallow book in which he used very dense and vague prose to give out the illusion that something more interesting was happening. That's my hottest Pynchon take so far, and I expect that to probably be the hottest take I'll have with him as an author, and especially with a first read through of his stuff. The ending of this book is so dumb. Not dumb, but it's a happy ending, and I understand because all of his novels up to this point have had sad endings. Like, maybe he just wanted to have a happy ending, but he could have just been this gut punch, and he held his hand, and instead, it's not even just the fact that it's a simple ending, but the fact that the ending is so dense with just paragraph after paragraph. It's a long chapter, and it just serves no real purpose to be as long and as convoluted as it is, in my opinion. I won't go into spoilers for that part. It doesn't ruin the book, but it left a sour taste in my mouth, and what ultimately leaves this book as being, in my mind, quote-unquote, mid. Also, Pynchon's comedy is a bit hit or miss for me. Here, he thinks these two criminals / mechanics named Blood and Vato are just like the most hilarious duo of all time, and I think they are the opposite of the most hilarious duo of all time. And some of their comical scenes go on forever, and I did not enjoy them. There's just so much going on in Vineland, and I think some of it is due to the shortness of the novel, but it just feels like whereas Gravity's Rainbow had so much in the pot with all these crazy ideas, and to a certain extent all of them feel that well realized, or realized enough, Vineland feels like a lot of wasted potential in many ways to me. I know that Paul Thomas Anderson is making a movie on this, and I'll be very interested to see how it turns out, but at least how this book is structured, it doesn't really fit the movie format, so I'll anticipate it with bated breath there. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts on Vineland. Interestingly enough, Harold Bloom, if you watch my Ulysses videos, you know that I constantly called Leopold Bloom Harold Bloom, and now that I have to reference Harold Bloom, I call him Leopold Bloom. Harold Bloom called this book a disaster. He is a huge Pynchon supporter. He was a huge Pynchon supporter, and he calls, I think, Mason and Dixon the best book in the 1990s. Did not feel very highly about Vineland, and I don't feel as strongly negative against this book, as he does. But at the same time, I also view the book as a ton of wasted potential. But speaking of Mason and Dixon, that book is next. I'm not in a huge rush to read it. I will try to have it done by July. I will be doing some traveling over the summer, but expect it hopefully in July or August. But in the meantime, I will try to make videos that are not related to Thomas Pynchon. I apologize, I've just been so busy, especially in April and May. I'm hoping that in June my schedule will clear up with the end of the term, and that I can start making more content again. But I do really love doing Project Pynchon, and I really don't want to stop because now I'm halfway through. I have only 4 more books left. 2 of them are his longest books, I think. So from a page count perspective, I'm not really halfway through, but whatever. We'll get through it. So thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. I have Instagram in the link below. Check out my Project Pynchon playlist as well. And check out Film Frauds. I do it with Carlos Wonderland. He still makes content, I just wish we got like 1/20 of the views that he gets on his YouTube channel. I'm very happy with Film Frauds. I think it's a really great podcast. Obviously, I'm a biased perspective, but I would appreciate it if you gave it a chance. So thank you, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.